Ultimate Frisbee. It's a game you probably haven't thought about since middle school gym. But it's way more than just a game. It's a full-blown sport with teams across the nation and world competing for glory and producing really sick highlights.
But where did it come from? What are the origins of this schoolyard classic? And what does the future of Ultimate Frisbee hold? To answer that question, we of course need to start by talking about the history of the Frisbee.
As it turns out, Americans have been throwing disc-like objects around for fun since at least the 1950s. Students at Yale University used to reuse pie tins from the local Frisbee pie company. They'd turn them upside down and throw them as discs.
On the West Coast, a man named Fred Morrison had been doing a similar thing. He came up with the idea to make a disc out of plastic, so it was a little bit more reliable. He called his design the Pluto Platter and began selling it in 1951.
The toy company Wham-O bought the rights to the Pluto Platter in 1957, and after hearing students on the East Coast, presumably from Yale, call the disc a Frisbee, decided, if it's gonna sell more, we might as well change the name. And thus, the Frisbee was born. In 1967, just 10 years later, a group of high schoolers in Maplewood, New Jersey invented what would become the first rules of Ultimate Frisbee.
The original game was, of course, a lot more casual than the modern game, but a lot of the rules are relatively similar. For one, the end zones are like American football, and that's how you score. Number two, you're not allowed to move with the disc, but instead must pivot off of one foot to throw it. And number three, and most importantly, Ultimate players have to follow something called the spirit of the game. That's because there are no referees in Ultimate, which means players are expected to call their own fouls and respect other players' calls when they make them.
In 1968, the first game of Ultimate Frisbee was played in the parking lot of Columbia High School between the school newspaper and the Associated Student Government. The first interscholastic game happened just 2 years later, with Columbia beating neighboring Milburn High School by a score of 43-10. And just 2 years later in 1972, Rutgers played Princeton in the first intercollegiate game of Ultimate. Exactly 103 years earlier, Rutgers had played Princeton in the first intercollegiate game of American football. Rutgers won both games by 2 points, and the games were played on the exact same site.
And it was all up from there. Ultimate quickly expanded, first across the country and then the world, becoming the schoolyard classic we know it is today, and leading to cool things like this, Northwestern's Ultimate Frisbee House, where members of the Club Ultimate team here at Northwestern University live. Worldwide, the sport has been pushed by the World Flying Disc Federation, while here in the US, it's supported by USA Ultimate and the American Ultimate Disc League, and in 2015, Ultimate even gained Olympic-level recognition. We know won't see Ultimate in the 2028 Olympics here in Los Angeles, but we know that we could potentially see Ultimate as early as 2032 in Melbourne.
This is Pawel Janas. He plays semi-professional Ultimate for Chicago Union in the American Ultimate Disc League. He also plays for Chicago Machine, the best club team in the area.
I think they're going to try to grow globally. I actually think this whole like China thing. I think there's going to be a semi-pro league in Europe and a semi-pro league in Asia at some point in the next 10 years. So I think there might be like a more global push.
That's one thing the American Ultimate Disc League has been really good at. It's really good at drawing in new fans for the game, and it leads to a lot of players playing younger and younger.
It all depends where you live. It's always dependent on where you live. So I grew up in Colorado, and I could play high school Frisbee. And in the early so I was in high school in 2007, 2008. That was a rare thing to have in high school.
Whereas maybe 10 years ago, you might be pretty unlikely to find a high school team near you. It's pretty common now, and that leaves no doubt in my mind, Ultimate is here to stay and here to grow in the years that follow.